Calls it a strike to count on Taylor. Reyes fires. Swing and a drive. Deep left field. It's his way back. Walk the ball. Chris Taylor.
Hi, everyone. Welcome into another live episode of DodgerHeads presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Matthew Moreno, and joining me again tonight is our managing editor, Blake Williams. Blake, it felt like we were doing these live streams kind of every day for almost about a week just because there was so much going on. But then last couple of days, things have seemed to slow down a little bit. So how does it feel to be back with everybody?
It's good to be back. I definitely needed that little break there. There's a lot going on in those few days with the Ohtani signing and then his press conference. And then right after that, the Glasnow news broke and then they signed him to an extension and just a lot going on. So it was nice to have that little break, but good to be back.
Yeah, definitely. So I see people are still joining us. I know we've had some early questions. Hopefully the stuff Blake and I are going to discuss tonight will answer all those. But just give you all kind of a quick rundown of tonight's show. We're going to discuss the latest with Yoshinobu Yamamoto. Dodgers reportedly having interest in Josh Hader and Shōta Imanaga. Tyler Glasnow's contract extension that Blake just alluded to. Clayton Kershaw's comments on his interview with David Vassay of AM 570. Some JD Martinez stuff. And of course, we'll close the show out by taking your questions. But as a reminder, if you do want to guarantee that your question is answered or that your comment is read live on air while we're doing this, Super Chat is definitely the way to go. We'll stop what we're doing and definitely put that up on the screen, answer your question, and keep going. And also, but before we get into the show, I do want to remind everyone to please subscribe and ring the notification bell if you're joining us on YouTube. If you're a podcast person, please find us on Apple or Spotify and rate, review, subscribe, and all that good stuff. So, okay, let's begin with where things stand with Yamamoto. He reportedly had dinner with Mets owner, Steve Cohen, and their president of baseball operations, David Stearns, and more Mets personnel. The meeting was at Cohen's house in Connecticut. So that was on Saturday night. Then on Sunday, today, it was reported that Yamamoto had a second meeting with the Yankees as well. And what I think what might be most interesting with these recent developments is that it's being reported that Yamamoto requested the second meeting both with the Mets and the Yankees. If you remember, if you've joined us on some of our live shows already, Steve Cohen and Stearns flew out to Japan to see Yamamoto during the time that he was reportedly doing Zoom meetings with teams. That was before the winter meetings, and the winter meetings came. And since then, he's been having kind of these in-person discussions with teams. So given all that, Blake, my question to you, as you can see kind of on the banner that I've put up, is, are we looking at a situation where maybe the Dodgers are falling behind for Yamamoto? And I know, I mentioned the two New York teams, but there's also he's received a contract offer from other clubs. So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so regarding the contract offer, it was reported that San Francisco Giants and Boston Red Sox both made offers of more than $300 million to him. To me, I find that kind of significant because if you look at those teams, they're the two biggest rivals of the Dodgers and the Yankees. And throughout the whole process, it's been reported the Dodgers and the Yankees have the lead and are the favorites to sign him. So if an agent is trying to get some extra money from one of those clubs, what better teams to leak than the Giants and the Red Sox? Now, I do think both those clubs are also in the mix for him, but they don't seem as likely just based on the reports of what Yamamoto wants. It's been said he wants the big spotlight, so New York and LA make sense for both of those. And he might want to play with Ohtani. He might not want to play with Ohtani. We don't really know. There was one report that said Ohtani's presence at the meeting boosted the Dodgers' odds a bit. And the Dodgers are hopeful their odds are better off because Yamamoto grew up as a Dodger fan. But it's also been said that no team really knows what he's thinking at this point. It's similar to the Ohtani stuff where things aren't as private, but he's also not letting teams know what he's thinking necessarily. So there's a lot going on with him still. I wouldn't necessarily count the Dodgers out. He is their top priority right now, according to some reports, even after getting Glasnow and signing him to an extension. So I think the Dodgers are going to stay in this. To me, it seems like he's meeting with the finalists, and he was in New York for their meeting, and he said, let's do both at the same time. It was said he caught both of them off guard, and they weren't necessarily prepared to meet with him again. So it's not like something he planned out, like going to meet for a contract offer. So it would shock me if he doesn't meet with the Dodgers again soon, or if he didn't already have a meeting that we just haven't heard about yet.
So what you're telling me is maybe some free agency rumors have leaked for the sole purpose of leverage? Does that happen?
It's been known to happen. We'll see if it's the case here, but I totally would not doubt that.
Yeah, I think you brought up a great point from the standpoint of these meetings sort of caught the Mets and Yankees off guard a little bit. So it's not necessarily Yamamoto approaching them because potentially they're really deep into negotiations and maybe they want to try to figure out some final terms before agreeing to a deal. I am going to be curious to see what happens with the Dodgers and Yamamoto in terms of a second meeting. Obviously, it was reported that he was at Dodger Stadium last week. I believe that would have been on Monday or Tuesday. I think it was early in the week, right? I know it was after Ohtani kind of officially signed. Uh, Bobby Miller was recently reported as being among the players that were there. Like you mentioned, Ohtani, Freddie Freeman also. There have been some conflicting reports on Mookie Betts. I think Fabian Ardaya and maybe Ken Rosenthal reported Mookie was there, but then some Japanese media and their coverage of Yamamoto suggested that Mookie wasn't there. So a little unclear on that situation. But let's circle back kind of in terms of the Mets and Yankees. Is one of those teams kind of, do you view them as a bigger risk to the Dodgers than the other?
I think the Yankees are, just because they've been determined to get him since last year, and of course they have the money. And Yamamoto wants to play for a contender, and he wants the spotlight. And the Mets aren't really in that spot yet. They're a great franchise historically, but they're also lesser than the Dodgers and the Yankees. So just doesn't seem like he's gonna really want to sign there unless Steve Cohen blows him away with 400 million. So that's just my feeling on it. He could, of course, sign there. He's friends with Kodai Senga, but he's also friends with Ohtani. So it just really comes down to where he ultimately wants to be.
Yeah, and real quick, I do need to clarify. Joshua Blank, you brought up a great point. His comment was, "I thought Mookie was at the meeting but not at dinner." Yes, that is actually what I think the Japanese media was reporting, was that Mookie wasn't present at the dinner. Because then I remember, Blake, when you and I were discussing it, I even brought up that fact. I said, well, maybe he was at the stadium, but not necessarily dinner per se. So thank you for catching that, Joshua. And my apologies on not being clear with that. We did have an early super chat, so let's pause the Yamamoto talk really quick and get to that. This is from Doom Sal. He has two questions for us. I feel Kershaw signs with the Rangers and Buehler goes on the market after this year. Thoughts? Blake, I'll let you take that one.
So for Kershaw, it wouldn't shock me totally. It seems like it's 50-50 on whether he's going to be with the Dodgers or the Rangers next year. He is determined on pitching, and I think it was Jeff who brought up the point that the Rangers have a lot of injured starters, so maybe that might kind of push them out a bit, because I think it's Scherzer, DeGrom, and Tyler Mahle they all have coming back in the second half of the season, so they kind of need healthy starters now, and adding Kershaw to that mix seems like it might be tough to kind of deal with and manage through the season. And then maybe they have too many arms when he comes back. Regarding Buehler, we talked about this on the last show. I think the Dodgers are going to move on from him. I think they picked Glasnow over him, and they're probably going to target another pitcher this offseason to kind of replace him there. Buehler's stuff in 2021, after the sticky substance ban, it dropped significantly, and his fastball velocity has been declining for 2 years now. So I just don't see him being that ace level anymore, and I think the Dodgers are kind of getting that from it too. So I just don't really see him coming back, and it seems like they prefer Glasnow to him.
Yeah. Thank you for that super chat. Again, as a reminder, if you do want to go down that route, we will pause our show, kind of address your comment or question, and then get back to what we're discussing. And otherwise, if you do have questions, again, please save those for the end. We will we always plan to set aside time to interact with everybody and get as many of those answered as possible. So back to Yamamoto, you brought up an interesting point in terms of, you view the Yankees as kind of a bigger threat, the biggest threat maybe to the Dodgers, and your reason certainly makes sense, but I have a hard time. I think for me, it's the Mets. I think it's Steve Cohen. And maybe it's kind of a cliche take that he's going to, just spend whatever it takes. And I guess that is also at the risk of not necessarily factoring in maybe Yamamoto's presence. I know he is friends. It's been reported he has a friendship with Kodai Senga, and so maybe he would want to be teammates there. But part of me wonders if Cohen will, basically hand him a blank check because of how things have sort of gone for them. Not only that, but they are chasing the Yankees. And so I think if, the Mets can end up signing Yamamoto, not only is it a big splash in general, but also it gives the Mets kind of a leg up. They won, a battle, if you will, against the Yankees. But I'll put you on the spot really quick. Just one word answer. What team right now do you see Yamamoto signing with?
I'm staying with my prediction of he's going to be a Dodger. And
Okay.
if I can expand on that, but you wanted one
go
word.
ahead.
So.
No, go ahead.
I mean, I think the Dodgers still have the need for him. I think they obviously have the money for him. They're a winning team, and I think that's something he's going to value. And they have Shohei Ohtani. Like, you don't go into a meeting with Shohei Ohtani and say, no, I don't want to play with you, especially when the money's going to be similar. And like the Yankees and Mets both missed the playoffs last year, and they're not in the same position as the Dodgers. And of course, the West Coast, great weather. It's closer to Japan than New York teams are. So it just lines up all around for me. Maybe I'm being a little optimistic here, but I've said it since the start of the offseason. They're going to get Ohtani and Yamamoto, and I'm going to stick with it because he's their number one priority, and I kind of trust them to get that done, especially with the resources they have and Ohtani taking all that deferred money so they can try and remain competitive. He wants Yamamoto on his team, and I think that's going to play a factor.
Fair enough. Now, I have seen some questions asking about fallback options, Blake Snell being one of them. We're going to get into that next. But before we do, we have another super chat from Laura, who's one of our longtime supporters. So thank you, as always, Laura. She wants to know, does Ohtani's deferral force the issue on Yamamoto, or does Glasnow suffice? My guess, I think it depends how you want to interpret force the issue. Ohtani's deferrals, I think, certainly helped the Dodgers significantly in still going after Yamamoto. And as Blake has mentioned, as we have mentioned, Daniel, myself recently, any trade for a starter, whether it was Glasnow, Cease, Burns, I think wasn't going to preclude the Dodgers from necessarily going after Yamamoto. And arguably, they've needed multiple starting pitchers this offseason. They've added one, I guess, but it's also a 1-for-1 swap. So they're kind of back at square one when the offseason began. So you could argue that they need, Yamamoto plus another starter. So I don't see that as, I see it, yes, as forcing the issue from the standpoint of the Dodgers have the flexibility to go out and get Yamamoto, who they certainly need. Blake, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think it's always coming down to they were going to get two pitchers at least, regardless. And I said two top-end starters was what they needed, and I think the Dodgers have kind of agreed with that. And even after that, you can argue they need a third depth piece kind of guy to like be a fifth starter and just eat innings, just based on how their rotation is kind of shaking out and who they have. So all reports are the Dodgers are still interested in Yamamoto and see him as their top priority, even after Ohtani and Tyler Glasnow have been acquired. So I just don't see any reason why that would change now. So they need pitching, and they're going after it.
Yeah. So let's say things don't work out with Yamamoto. Fallback options, obviously, in terms of free agency and kind of some of the top-end pitchers, Blake Snell is a popular name, but it was reported by John Heyman recently that the Dodgers really no longer have any interest in Snell. I thought that was always a little far-fetched anyway when they were connected to him earlier in the offseason. But I think Shōta Imanaga is kind of an interesting secondary option, I don't see the Dodgers at this, considering what Ohtani's contract ended up being, even with the deferrals. Yamamoto's market sending his contract up towards $300 million. I don't see them getting Ohtani, Yamamoto, and Imanaga. But let's say if they were to miss out on Yamamoto, Dodgers have been linked to Imanaga once again. It happened earlier in the offseason, but I think it's a little bit more notable now, as we just referenced earlier in the show, that the Mets and Yankees are being somewhat aggressive for Yamamoto. The Giants and Red Sox have reportedly made a contract offer. So, Blake, I know that Yamamoto is, regarded as an ace, whereas Imanaga is more of a middle of the rotation pitcher, which the Dodgers could benefit from, but certainly have more of a need for top end starters. But is there a scenario where maybe, it makes sense for Imanaga to kind of be their guy that they start focusing on, whether it's because Yamamoto's market just gets to be too crazy for them, or you would be adding a left-hander instead of another right-hander?
It makes sense if they were to miss out on Yamamoto, but until that actually happens, there's no chance I'm starting to target Imanaga over him. Like, no disrespect to Imanaga, he's probably going to be a very solid pitcher at the major league level, but Yamamoto is just an ace. So when you have the option to get that, you have to go for that and put all the cards on the table to try and get him. But if they were to miss out on him, I do think Imanaga would be solid. I would hope they kind of turn to the trade market. Maybe Jesus Luzardo could be someone they look at, or go back to their Dylan Cease discussions. I don't think Corbin Burns is a real possibility at this point. I think the Brewers are going to try and hold on to him or trade with another team who might fit their needs a little bit better. And if that doesn't happen, I still would maybe prefer Jordan Montgomery there. He's probably going to get overpaid based on how he finished last season, but he's been a solid pitcher as well. So he could be someone the Dodgers look at. He kind of eats a lot of innings and fills their needs a bit more. So for Imanaga, I do have interest in him, and I think he's a good player, and I would like him on the team, but the focus just has to be all out on Yamamoto right now.
So I was going to ask you about Jordan Montgomery, mainly because he's a left-hander who's not Blake Snell and is available in the open market. So if I understood correctly, you would, let's say Yamamoto doesn't sign with the Dodgers, so their search for pitching becomes a little bit more desperate, if you will. You would hope that the Dodgers would focus more on Montgomery as opposed to Imanaga. Is that what I heard correctly?
Yeah, I think so. Just because more so what you're getting from him. He's a little more proven. He just showed he can pitch at a very high level in the playoffs. He doesn't cost a draft pick because he was traded at the deadline, so that wouldn't be a problem for them. It really, I think, would come down to value for me. Like, if Imanaga is getting a similar contract to him, I'm taking Montgomery all day. But if there's a pretty significant gap between Montgomery and Imanaga, then I'll probably target Imanaga. It just kind of comes down to how the market plays out, I think, there.
That's fair. That's fair. I think I honestly, I feel like Imanaga might get a more lucrative deal than Montgomery. But honestly, go ahead.
I would be shocked if that happens.
Really? I just kind of feel like it's kind of not the unknown sounds counterintuitive, obviously, but you maybe betting on some of the upside. Montgomery, I guess, would there be some concern that maybe he peaked and he's not necessarily going to be able to replicate that kind of success?
He probably did peak, which is why I'd be hesitant to pay him for that. But even before that, he was still a really solid pitcher. And I think you could probably make the case that Imanaga's upside is probably about where Montgomery's is too. So if you're paying for that upside, just go get the guy who's shown he can do it. I believe they're both 30 years old, so age isn't a big factor there. But Montgomery has the experience and he's proven it. Whereas Imanaga, you're more kind of betting on the unknown.
Yeah, those are good points. We have another super chat. This one's from Pizza in the Box. He said, Yamamoto is used to being in the finals in Japan. He'll get money anywhere. Dodgers will get him to the World Series sooner. Blake, I know that's I don't think you're going to necessarily disagree with any of that, right?
I mean, I fully agree with it. You can't look at how the Yankees and Mets are built and how they performed last year and say they're a better team than the Dodgers right now. And of course, we know once you get into the postseason, there's a lot of randomness. So anything can happen, and being the best team doesn't guarantee anything. But if you're just betting on rosters and the talent around you, there's no better place for Yamamoto to be than the Dodgers. And with Ohtani being on the roster, every Dodger game is going to be broadcast in Japan moving forward for the next decade. So I think it would be a great opportunity for him to keep increasing his brand, both in Japan and in the United States. And it just seems like it works out very well for him.
Yeah. So we have another super chat, different topic, but thank you, Jose Ayala. He says, besides Outman in the outfield, I still feel concerns. I really think it's important for the Dodgers to pull out a trade. So just quick reminder, obviously Dodgers and Rays did finalize their trade on Saturday. Dodgers sent Ryan Pepio and Johnny DeLuca to the Rays for Tyler Glasnow and Manuel Margot. So they did add a major league experienced outfielder. I know DeLuca made his MLB debut this year, but Margot's got more experience out there in terms of upside, potential, ceiling, who's the better player. that's a different discussion for a different day. So in terms of the outfield, they've added Margot, and Jason Hayward is back, and that goes with James Outman, Chris Taylor, Mookie Betts on rare occasion, James Outman, as Jose mentioned. But Blake, how are you feeling with the outfield?
I still think they need another outfielder, and based on how their roster is shaped out, I think it's going to be a left-handed hitting outfielder, just because they would have someone to platoon with Chris Taylor in left field. From a personal standpoint, I'd like to see them add an everyday left fielder who hits right-handed, or even a right fielder who hits right-handed, and then you can move Hayward to left and Margot in left. But just based on their lineup, for me, I think they could use a right-handed bat in the middle of their lineup to kind of help break up all the lefties at the bottom. You're going to have Outman, Hayward, Lux, and Max Muncy in your, I think, 5 through 9 spots there. So that's a lot of lefties that you're probably going to need to break up with a righty. So I think that would benefit them, but they're probably going to end up just going with a platoon and left with Chris Taylor and maybe a Max Kepler type. I think he was a name they were connected to. They're connected to Jock Peterson already, which I like Jock Peterson as a hitter. Questions about his defense, maybe they'll kind of pass on that just because of that, but they will add another outfielder to the roster.
Yeah, I agree with you. You and I have been on the same page in terms of when it comes to an outfielder of, finding an everyday guy who I agree does hit right-handed. Now, those aren't readily available. I see some people in the comments saying Teoscar Hernandez. Sure, I personally have some concerns over him. But yeah, it'll be interesting. Go ahead.
It would be funny if they signed Jock and Tommy Pham. Just embrace the chaos there, some might say. And Tommy Pham was really solid last year, hitting both righties and lefties. So be fun. And then you can get Margot off the roster, move him back to San Diego or something, and everyone will be happy.
Yeah, maybe the pod. I think reports out of San Diego, the Padres are looking to trim payroll, so Dodgers might have to send them some cash as well if they were to do something like that.
Well, the Rays are eating a salary, so
that's right.
A good spot there.
Maybe just continue to divert the cash. All right, so let's get into the bullpen now. As much as we talk pitching throughout much of the offseason, it's focused on the rotation. But about late last week now, it was reported that the Dodgers were interested in Josh Hader. I don't know about you. This caught me by surprise in some sense, but also Andrew Friedman has regularly said that he likes to be opportunistic with things. And honestly, Josh Hader could be an opportunity that is presenting itself to the Dodgers that was maybe unexpected. And so, in large part because of some of the financial flexibility that they have, thanks to Shohei Ohtani deferring so much of his salary. Tom Verducci said the Dodgers would potentially look to sign Josh Hader. He did also mention Yamamoto, who we covered earlier in this video. Blake, just your initial thoughts on Hader potentially being added to the bullpen.
It surprised me because Friedman isn't the type to pay relievers. That's usually more the less analytically inclined front offices that tend to do that. And he would also cost draft picks. And since they already signed Ohtani, who's going to cost some draft picks, they're going to end up trading more or losing more draft picks to sign Josh Hader. But there also hasn't been many teams connected to him. And like you said, with Andrew Friedman, it could be an opportunity where he sees the possibility of getting an elite player on a smaller contract than many would have projected. So I think it's something they're exploring. And maybe they also see it as an option to kind of shorten the games instead of getting another elite starter if they were to miss out on Yamamoto and not go out and get Dylan Cease or something. You add Hader and Evan Phillips at the back of your bullpen, and now you basically have 7-inning games, which kind of lessens the need for starting pitchers. It's been a strategy that the Royals used and kind of made popular, and other teams have tried it, and most of them haven't been as successful with it just because of how hard it actually is to build an elite bullpen. But it makes sense from that perspective as a fallback option if they do miss out on some of the top starting pitchers. So maybe you get Imanaga and Josh Hader instead of Yamamoto, and you're upgrading your pitching staff significantly. And although it's not your starting rotation, which is what they mostly need, you're still adding impact pieces that could help you in October.
Yeah, so you mentioned it. Hader's market this offseason is, basically been non-existent, at least publicly. And a few weeks ago, he's the best relief pitcher available. A few weeks ago, it was reported that the Orioles had some interest, but then they quickly pivoted and signed Craig Kimbrell. So yeah. So Hader is still out there, and as much as I think there was an expectation that he would get a contract similar to is it Edwin Diaz, right? The Mets closer.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get my Diaz's mixed up. That hasn't really that type of contract hasn't really materialized for Josh Hader. And like you and I both brought up, when it comes to Andrew Friedman, if there is kind of top end upper echelon talent on the market, whether trades or free agency, the Dodgers do at least sort of check in a little bit. And Hader, this year he went 2-3 with a 1.28 ERA, 33 saves and 38 opportunities. So the pedigree is there. I think if you dig a little bit deeper, there maybe are some concerns with, I don't know how strongly he has insisted on certain things with his usage, but I know there were reports out of San Diego that, he's basically only a ninth inning guy. So a closer, which from a closer standpoint, I think the Dodgers could slot him into their bullpen as much as Evan Phillips filled that role admirably this year. I think the Dodgers value him more in a fireman role. But also with Hader, he's not somebody who's going to go necessarily multiple innings. And so on one hand, that does limit the Dodgers a little bit in how they would utilize him. On the other hand, they have a deep bullpen. And if you look at their projected bullpen group as it is right now, like fitting Hader in is not necessarily easy with the current group. With their reported interest, do you think that there's maybe any concern internally for the Dodgers with Treinen's projection and what he might be able to contribute this year? Because he is another theoretical back-end relief pitcher, even though he is coming off a significant injury.
I think the hope of Treinen is don't expect anything, and whatever you get is a positive from him at this point. It's been basically 2 years, I think, since he last pitched, and the last time he was at the major league level, he threw 5 innings before getting hurt. So you just really can't count on him at all. If he comes back, great. If he doesn't, they're paying him $1 million. You kind of move on from that easily as the Dodgers. But with Hader, there's concerns about him. I think some of the specific roles he wanted might have been due to his pay and wanting to get that closer money instead of 8th inning money. Even though teams value firemen as much as they do closers now, the arbitration projections and all that don't always see it that way. So I think if you're paying him well enough, he could be an 8th inning guy for you if you needed that, or kind of slot into that fireman role. But I don't think they'd sign him just as a closer. They'd probably pass on that after checking in and seeing what he actually wants. So that's just my take on it. We'll see what they actually do. I'd still be shocked if they get him, though.
At what point would you think that, like, what kind of terms roughly, whether years or just general money, do you think it would need to be with Hader for it to, like, quote unquote, make sense for the Dodgers?
That's tough for me to answer specifically because I don't like paying any reliever, and I think you know this.
That's right.
What was Edwin Diaz's contract? Let me look it up real quick.
I think, what is he, like 4 or 5 years? I mean,
I
don't see,
5.
As you're looking that up, I'll add, like, and I could be wrong, obviously, but I don't see Hader getting that type of contract at this point, short of a team maybe becoming desperate and needing to sign a closer. But just the way his market has gone so far, like, I don't know if that's going to materialize for him.
So Edwin Diaz got 5 years, $102 million, which is essentially $20 million AAV. For what I would give Hader, I'd probably increase the AAV a bit to try and get him on a shorter term deal. So maybe $375 or something around there, or even add an option after that to see how he does this year if he wants that potential opt-out to reassess his market next season when he won't have the qualifying offer attached to him. So that's just my perspective on it. I still don't love the idea of paying relievers. As much as other people are going to disagree with this, I still think Alex Vesia and Caleb Ferguson are essentially quality left-handed relievers. They have good stuff and they've put up results. Last year was kind of a roller coaster, specifically for Vesia, but a year before that, he was one of the best relievers they had and arguably one of the best lefty relievers in baseball. And just with how volatile relievers are, I don't see why he couldn't get back to that point this year. So I personally just wouldn't pay the reliever. I'd go give that money to Yamamoto if that's what it takes to get it done. So just how I see it.
It's a fair point. I agree. For me, I think 3 years is definitely the longest I would be interested in Hader. Ideally 2 years. Perfect world, which I don't see. 1 year with maybe a high AAV, like you said, get him in with the Dodgers. Certainly more high profile environment than what he ended up having with the Padres because of their struggles. Maybe pitches well, doesn't have a qualifying offer and draft pick compensation attached to him, and yeah, maybe a year from now, there's potentially a better market for him. But for now, that's kind of where things stand. The Dodgers reportedly, according to Tom Verducci, would potentially look to sign Josh Hader, in part because of, like I said, the financial flexibility that they've been afforded by Shohei Ohtani deferring so much of his salary. So we have another super chat from Hawaiian Kira. Have you heard about the KBO pitcher? And I hope I'm going to pronounce this correctly. Go Woo Suk. He posted this year and is the brother-in-law of Lee Jung-ho, who just signed with the Giants. I personally don't know anything about him. I'm not always the most up-to-date on the international players who are getting posted outside of, kind of the star names. Blake, is there anything you can add or that you were able to find?
I didn't know about him, so I just went to Baseball Reference real quick. He's a reliever, career 3.18 ERA in the KBO, 368 innings with 401 strikeouts. So he could be someone they target. I don't know too much about him, so I'm not going to say much more than that about him. But I mean, the Dodgers have great international scouting, and if they see something there with him that they like, they'll go after him. I'm just not sure. I see it with how crowded their bullpen already is.
Yeah. Thanks again, Hawaiian Kira, for that super chat. I know you've been in here with us for several weeks. We appreciate the support. We have another one from John Bleedin' Blue, who's also been a longtime viewer with us. Why the courtship? If Yamamoto wants to be a Dodger, then why visit Phillies or any other team? Is it just for a free dinner? Is that it? A free dinner? LOL.
I mean, is anyone going to turn down a free dinner? If this is probably maybe his one chance to be a free agent, unless he takes some opt-out, so make the best of it. When you're deciding on your next team, even if you have the team in mind, it doesn't hurt to go hear what other teams have proposed for you and listen to their offers and what they're proposing and all that. There's just no real harm to it. There's probably more downside to not doing it than there is to actually take them if you know what team you already want to be on. So free dinner, get to travel a little bit, see what other teams have. It just makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with you. One, there's the meal component and the free food, as you referenced. That's, I think, an easy angle and storyline to kind of laugh about. I think also the other side is, like you said, with free agency, it could be a leverage play. This information getting out, maybe the Dodgers feel like, oh man, the Yankees and or Mets are still really in it. We need to be aggressive, either with a number of years we're going to offer him or just total dollars. That's a factor as well. And I think, I'll just remind everybody that Ohtani did visit the Blue Jay spring training facility in Florida. That was true. But every indication from reporters who have kept close tabs of the situation said he still ultimately came down to like the Dodgers and Angels for the most part. There were other stuff about the Blue Jays being in the running, and sure, they were a finalist, but they didn't necessarily appear to be one of the two teams, I guess you could say, that he was ultimately deciding between. So free agents visiting with teams, nothing new. Yamamoto's not the first, certainly not going to be the last. And, it could just be to get insight from teams and just see, maybe you hear something from one front office that changes your opinion late in the process. But I don't think it's anything to necessarily be too worried about. And as we mentioned earlier in the show, the second meetings that he had with both the Yankees and Mets caught them kind of by surprise. So it wasn't necessarily planned, and maybe they're on the verge of signing a deal by any means. But thanks, John, for that super chat. Let's move on to now our next topic, and that is Tyler Glasnow's contract extension. So if you missed it, we have, even though we've referenced it on tonight's show, the Dodgers finalized their trade with the Rays on Saturday to acquire Tyler Glasnow and Manuel Margot in exchange for Ryan Pepio and Johnny DeLuca. Blake, I know we've discussed kind of the upside and the risk with the trade, which much of that centers around Glasnow, and the deal was also contingent on the Dodgers and Glasnow working out a contract extension, because at the time he was only under team control for the 2024 season. Then he was due to become a free agent. Whereas, obviously Ryan Pepiot, the Dodgers were going to have a handful of years of team control because of his service time. So the extension with Glasnow ended up coming out to a deal that's worth $136.5 million, and it's going to keep him with the Dodgers at least through the 2027 season. For 2028, the Dodgers have a $30 million team option that, if they decline, becomes a $20 million player option that Glasnow would then get to decide if he wants to stay with the team for another year or become a free agent. So, Blake, now that we have the financial terms on the extension, has your opinion or perception of the trade changed at all? I know you're already very high on it because of Glasnow's upside, but do you feel maybe more strongly in that regard, or was there no change?
So when it first came out, I was probably the high man on the show about Glasnow.
Not probably. I
Well,
know
Scott was up
you
there.
and Scott. I think you were a little bit higher than Scott, but yes, you guys were 1A and 1B.
Either way, yeah, from the talent standpoint, he's the ace of the staff right now. And on an innings per innings basis, he's a top 5 starter in baseball, I believe. He just has that kind of talent, and it completely changes the Dodgers' perception or the rotation. But when it came out about the contract extension, I was a little hesitant more. It kind of brought my excitement slightly down just because you're adding that risk there of he's had the injury history, and that's been a concern. And anytime you add more risk to a deal, I feel like that makes it a little more worrisome to it. You were already giving up Ryan Pepiot for him. So it's good to have him under contract for long term, but with the injury history he's had, there is somewhat of a concern there. But after reading more about his past injury histories and kind of looking into it, and he went on a podcast and talked about it before, I'm a little more confident with the deal that he'll be able to stay at least somewhat healthy. I know pitchers always get hurt, and I think saying I said was pitcher's break before that stuck for a while, but it's the truth to it. You can't really rely on any pitcher to stay healthy because pitchers always suffer injuries. It's just how it is. But with Glasnow's injury for that 2019, 2020, and 2021 years where he was dealing with the elbow injury, that was pretty much all the same problem. And it had to do with his tendon coming off the bone and not necessarily tearing. So instead of a normal Tommy John where they're reconnecting the tear in the elbow, his just came off the bone. And it lasted that long because the doctors couldn't see that on the MRI, but he knew something was wrong with it. So they went and did the surgery, and then they found out and said, oh, your muscle isn't on the bone, and that's why you're having these problems. So since that point, he's stayed relatively healthy. He had the oblique injury last year, but that's just one of the things that happens with pitchers. I mean, if you want to point it out, Ryan Pepiot had the same injury and missed longer in the season than Tyler Glasnow did. So I think from that perspective, it gives me hope that he'll be able to stay healthy enough to throw 100+ innings every year. There's still risk to it, but I do like it more with the extension now from that point. And it's grown on me even more since it first came out, just hearing about it, watching him highlights and watching him pitch more and kind of looking into everything.
Do you think the doctors gave Glasnow our bad when they didn't, once they realized what they were missing?
I mean, I think because it wasn't like they saw a small tear, but that's normal for any pitcher. So it's just something like you couldn't really see that on any MRI or whatever they did to test it because the ligament was intact. There was no real issues with it. It just wasn't fully attached to the bone. So that's when Glasnow said, there's something wrong. Let's go and do the surgery regardless of what you're seeing and try and figure it out. So they went and did that and found out the issue. And since that point, he hasn't had any arm issues. And that's the main thing you're always concerned about with the pitcher.
Yeah, I'll zag a little bit and say I wonder if the Dodgers might have thought he had like the actual Tommy John UCL reconstruction surgery, because I know we've gotten a lot of tweets and comments and jokes that the Dodgers love those types of pitchers. So maybe they didn't necessarily know that, and they might have buyer's remorse. And of course, I say that all in jest. There was a lot of concern. There has been a lot of concern raised about Glasnow's injury history, including from myself. And I think, I've expressed my thoughts on this trade that it doesn't matter what names were involved. I didn't think it made much sense for the Dodgers to be trading 1-for-1 with a pitcher, just because I felt like their current group, let's roll it back to with Pepiot, they needed to add 2 or 3 pitchers to that on top of who they had in-house already, not like do any sort of 1-for-1 If it was a 1-for-2, if they were acquiring another starting pitcher instead of Margot, great. I will say that for me, the extension does change it pretty dramatically. Honestly, I can understand a little bit more from the Dodgers standpoint, because I do feel like now at this point, if Glasnow, if he is injured at some point next season, like, it's not just going to be the 1 year that the Dodgers had with him. And yes, I get that runs both ways. Whereas, if he does still deal with some injuries moving forward, that you've committed, $136.5 million to him, fine. As you and I have sort of joked and like to say, it's not our money. Like, Dodgers can clearly afford it and spend it, so it's fine. But I think that makes it, the biggest takeaway, and you touched on a lot of it, is it turns out that Glasnow's injury concern and, kind of the label that he's injury prone might have been a little misconstrued. And especially with the Tommy John or not having the traditional Tommy John surgery, I think that's a bonus for the Dodgers and Glasnow, obviously, himself. And so, yes, the oblique injury, like, I'm not going to hold that against him this year. Pitchers, like you just said, Pepio, and that I was going to bring him up as well. Pitchers, unfortunately, can suffer an oblique injury and not be injury prone. And so that was a little bit of a freak accident. Then once Glasnow, I don't know why I blanked on his name for a second, Glasnow came back from the oblique trouble, he did pitch well. And I think he set a career high in innings this year, right?
Innings and starts, yeah.
Yeah. So, things hopefully are trending up for Glasnow and the Dodgers in that regard. And yeah, I think, like I said, you agree, you and I seem to be in agreement that the extension sort of makes it a little bit better of a trade. I was a little bit more hesitant to give it a positive reaction or grade at the time. I've since come around. I think you're pretty high on it, you said, but you've come down a little bit, or you've gone up a little bit?
I was high on it, and then I came down with the extension because of his injury history. And then reading more into the history, I came back up on it. So I'm all in. I'm excited. Glasnow going to be the ace of this staff.
Okay, so what Disneyland roller coaster was that for you then? Is it the Incredicoaster at California Adventure? Was it Big Thunder Mountain? Which one?
Big Thunder Mountain is kind of like slow, I guess, not really this roller
Okay.
coastery. So are we gonna go with that? Like, it's got to be Incredicoaster, right?
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Let's move on to now Clayton Kershaw. He was on with David Vassay of AM 570, and he got him to. It was Kershaw's first public interview, public comment since having his shoulder surgery that he announced on Instagram a couple months ago. Among the things that Kershaw discussed was the contract Ohtani signed. He sort of marveled at just the money that Ohtani was able to get, and he lauded how talented of a player he is. Kershaw discussed his recovery from shoulder surgery, which seems to be going well. He remains confident in still pitching next season. Our friend David Vassay did try to coax an answer out of Kershaw a little bit about his future, but there wasn't any sort of tipping his hand as to which team he may sign with. But let's sort of focus for me. What I think was maybe the biggest thing to take from the interview is how well things seem to be going for Kershaw since his shoulder surgery. He said he was in a sling for about 3 days, but other than that, he's been pain-free. And part of his decision to have the surgery, he did acknowledge that there was, I think he said 10 days to 2 weeks time that he took after the season ended to really mull over his future and discuss it with his wife, Ellen. And ultimately he settled on coming back, but also he wanted to be pain-free when he came back. So that was kind of the big impetus behind the surgery. He is, like I said, recovering well. Do you feel maybe any differently about the outlook for Kershaw, whether in general or Dodgers related for 2024?
Not entirely. For me, it's still wait and see. I mean, shoulder injuries are just so tough to come back from, especially for a pitcher. Like we see with hitters, it usually takes them about 2 years for them to regain their power after a shoulder surgery. And for a pitcher, it's way more inconsistent. Like to this point, Tommy John recoveries are probably 90 to 95% success rates, but shoulders are maybe closer to 50%. So you just really never know what you're going to get there. And with his age, it's still concerning to me. His stuff has been down already. So combined with that, we just don't know. So I wouldn't mind the team bringing him back, but I also wouldn't bet on him to come back. And I hope they wouldn't bet on him to be a significant part of their rotation moving forward.
And I know we, excuse me, we touched on this a little bit earlier in the show, but the Rangers have obviously loomed as kind of the biggest threat for Kershaw if he wasn't going to remain with the Dodgers. And I know the Rangers starting rotation, as you touched on, is dealing with a lot of injuries at this point, and a lot of pitchers who wouldn't be coming back until like basically the second half of the 2024 season, which is Kershaw's rough timeline, more or less. If the Rangers did decide to look past, that and still had interest in Kershaw, which it sort of seems like they might, do you see him maybe in light? Did anything from his interview with David Vassegh make you feel one way or the other? Like, okay, if he does want to come, I think we can clearly say like his plan is to come back. It's not like, he announced it, yes, when he had the surgery. Now things are going well. He's feeling well. So there doesn't seem to be any question as to whether or not he'll be able to sort of at least try to come back.
So
Did the interview, go ahead.
I didn't really get that sense from him, but I've also seen people saying like he sounded bitter and he's mad at the Dodgers kind of thing. And then I've also seen people on Twitter saying he sounded great with the interview and like he said on coming back to the Dodgers. So it's just, I feel like everyone's kind of putting their own spin on it as to what they think's going to happen with him. I just don't really know. It's going to be, does he want to stay with one franchise forever and have probably the best opportunity of winning? Or does he want to go spend as much time as he can with his family while continuing to play? I don't think Kershaw knows that answer fully yet. And I don't think any of us really know for sure either, of course, because he doesn't know. So that's just how I see it. I would still bet, if anywhere, he stays with the Dodgers just because it is special to spend your entire career in one place and kind of go down as a legend with that franchise. Of course, he will be that even if he goes to the Rangers, but it's just so rare to see players stay with one team for their entire career, and it's special when they do that. So I think that'll ultimately win out for Kershaw, and then after that, he'll have the rest of his life to spend with his family. So I think he'll stay with the Dodgers, but just a total guess.
Yeah, I do agree with you, and that does remind me. I think we should address the perception and claims and comments that Kershaw was bitter either towards Ohtani and or the Dodgers. I think if you just read some of the quotes on Twitter or in articles, maybe they could be interpreted that way. As somebody who listened to the interview live as it was happening, I can tell you that Kershaw was upbeat throughout the entire interview with David Vassegh, again on AM 570. That was one of his Dodger Talk shows. And there wasn't any sort of like resentment at all that kind of came across that came out of him. Even when he was talking about Ohtani's contract and how much money he received, it was more just like I said, marveling at that amount. I mean, it's a $700 million contract. Like literally has never been seen, not only in MLB history, but professional sports history as well. And I see we have Sandy Koufax 32 has joined us. So thank you, Sandy, for being in here. I haven't seen Bob, our friend Bob Nightingale, in the chat tonight. So maybe he'll join us before we finish out here.
He's probably getting the Yamamoto scoop right now.
Yeah, maybe he's getting the all the updates on the New York visit, or I guess Connecticut and New York visits. But anyway, back to Kershaw. He was not bitter. It did not come. If you're listening, if you're able to listen to it, there's Bob Glasnow, right on cue. Thank you, Bob. He says, no way, that's Sandy. I want to believe that Sandy Koufax has joined us just like Bob Nightingale does. So we're just going to say Bob and Sandy are in here with us tonight. The Kershaw thing, he wasn't bitter at all. And I just want to kind of put that to bed because that's not, I think, fair to accuse him of. Again, if you had a chance to, it's podcasted. So I encourage everybody, if you weren't listening, to go back and listen so you could hear his tone and how happy he was for Ohtani just as a player, as one of his peers, and his future, how optimistic he is, and not necessarily, like you said, being sure of what team he may end up signing with. So we do have another super chat. This one is from Saki Bomb. With all this current spending, do we feel worried about some future extensions? Will Smith, Walker Buehler, Justin May, etc.? I mean, we have to reset this tax sometime, right?
For me, like I said, I already think they're going to move on from Walker Buehler. I don't necessarily see May as an extension candidate just because he's dealt with a tremendous amount of injuries already. Like, if you want to talk about Tyler Glasnow's injury history, we'll put up Dustin May's next to it, and it's worse. So it just doesn't make sense to me. With Will Smith, I could see it going either way. They have a lot of top catching prospects who could take over for him, but he's also a big piece of their lineup, and I think they value that. The question is, how well is he going to age long term as a catcher? And he has had struggles in the second half of pretty much every season, so that's a concern there. But they'll have money coming off the books at the same time. I think Chris Taylor has 2 years left, 1 year left, somewhere around there. So that'll clear up money there. They'll lose money in other spots. They're planning ahead for all these things and targeting who they want to keep around and who they're probably going to let walk. So I don't think it's anything to worry about. The Dodgers have money, of course, and the tax number is going to keep going up. So they'll have even more money as time goes on. So I don't think it's something to worry about at this point.
Yeah, and I think, well, with respect to Walker Buehler and Dustin May specifically, I think the Dodgers very much are going to be kind of in a holding pattern, wait and see, how much they pitch, how they look pitching. And then, in terms of, they probably won't necessarily be signed to a contract extension at that point, but maybe contracts in free agency. Will Smith, I think, is definitely the interesting one. I could see that going similar to Corey Seager, where, maybe the Dodgers have interest, but if Will Smith's market gets to a certain level that they just don't necessarily feel comfortable in doing, that they will then rely on some of their organizational depth that you that you mentioned, or look to, maybe getting kind of a veteran, traditional kind of backup catcher type thing to just sort of fill the roster if you have talent kind of in other places. So thank you go ahead.
Maybe, for all we know, maybe Will Smith is their future third baseman when Muncy leaves in 2 years. I mean, he played there for a little bit before it didn't go well, but maybe some more training there. It'll be a way to keep his bat fresh. Who knows? Probably not, but crazy idea. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah, there you go. We'll have to get Jeff on here once he's back from vacation to talk about third baseman Will Smith and see how open he is to that idea.
We got the vacuum cleaner, Brooks Robinson at third base, and we can follow it up with the janitor. Great baseball history right there.
Yeah, makes sense. We do have another super chat. This one's from Rez. What do you guys think of Jorge Soler as a right-handed bat? I feel like this is a question teed up for Scott most, but we'll answer it.
As a right-handed bat, he's a great option. As a fit for the Dodgers, probably not as much. I think another team's going to be a little more desperate to pay him and get his bat in their lineup. And he can't really play defense all that well, so it just doesn't seem like it makes a whole lot of sense for the Dodgers at this point. Maybe if they missed out on Ohtani and JD went somewhere else, it would have made a little more sense for them, but I just don't see it really being a fit at this point.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it what makes it hard to find maybe kind of an everyday outfielder that you and I referenced earlier on the show tonight. The Dodgers, they've done their heavy lifting with Ohtani. They've started it at least with Ohtani. They need to continue it with addressing the starting rotation because, as we've mentioned, it's not like they just need a pitcher. They've needed some quality. They need to add quality pitching. Tyler Glasnow certainly represents that potential. Yamamoto obviously is another one, and by all accounts, his contract now is going to be $300 million, either give or take, either just below or just over, maybe. So, yeah, I mean, Jorge Soler, they have some interest, but he could end up getting multi-year contract offers, and just the Dodgers sort of get priced out because they're needing to prioritize other spots of their roster. And I think the Soler question plays in nicely to our next topic, and that's JD Martinez continuing to draw interest on the market. A couple weeks ago, or maybe just shy of that, the Diamondbacks were reported as having interest in a reunion with Martinez, and he's still among kind of several noteworthy free agents who are looking for a team. And now the Blue Jays have kind of entered the picture for him, and obviously they were in the running for Ohtani to some degree. Blake, do you see the Diamondbacks or Blue Jays potentially having, one of them having an edge or an inside track to be a better landing spot for JD?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think maybe the D-backs, if I had to pick one, just because they have the familiarity with him and he wouldn't have to move as far. I think changing U.S. teams is a lot different than going to a Canadian team. And I think Martinez might just be a little more focused on winning. And the Diamondbacks have been aggressive this offseason, adding talent to their roster. And Of course, they made it to the World Series this year, so that makes sense to me. They've also been connected to Justin Turner, so the Diamondbacks are trying to add a DH. So I'd say they're the favorites for Martinez at this point, but the Blue Jays do have a lot of money, and it would be a reunion in the AL East for him, so could make sense there too.
Yeah, and we have, excuse me, a question from Scott Johnson. I'm throwing this one up because it was actually something that I was going to bring up as part of our JD discussion. Scott says, speaking of a right-handed bat, can JD play left field?
So I was kind of thinking about this the other day, but I think it was more just kind of joking, like a what-if scenario. Dave Roberts said Ohtani might play left field at the end of the year, so you kind of just punt the regular season and say, JD, go do whatever you can defensively in left field for us for the season. And then when Ohtani's ready, he'll play left field for the playoffs and we can have you DH. And I think that would be a really funny idea to go with, but I just don't see it as a realistic idea necessarily. I mean, I just don't think the Dodgers are going to run JD out there every day. You'd probably have to limit his amount of games a lot. He already struggled to stay healthy as a DH last year. And even if he's past that, he's still getting up there in age and he doesn't run very well anymore. So I just don't see it really being a possibility, but it's kind of funny to think about. Maybe you could also do that with Justin Turner, play Max Muncy at second, and then have Justin Turner DH in the playoffs. But it's just kind of a crazy out of the box idea that's more fun to think about than something that's realistic.
Yeah, on one hand, JD certainly profiles as the type of hitter I think the Dodgers lineup needs. We've mentioned it. They need, right-handed bat who can hit for some power. But yeah, I think just unfortunately the health issues he dealt with stinks. Then you're incorporating, needing to play the outfield, which he hasn't really done with any sort of regularity of late. We did see him in left field a few times this season, kind of emergency cases. I know JD said during spring training, some teammates were giving him a hard time, asking if he even owns a glove, which he said, yes, he does. So yeah, I think on one hand, it makes sense for it would work for the Dodgers from like a lineup standpoint, but on the other hand, like you said, just not kind of basically playing JD out of position for an entire year would possibly not go well. So Scott, thank you for that question. As I said, it was right in line with what I was getting ready to ask Blake. So that is it for JD. We're going to get ready to answer some of your questions. And as a reminder, if you do have those, start throwing them in the chat now. Just lead with question in all caps so that it's easier for us to kind of pick out and answer and separate from kind of the comments you guys are having back and forth. And while those are coming in, Blake, what can you tell us about the 2023 all MLB teams that were announced?
So yeah, as Matt just said, the all MLB teams were announced, which highlights the best player at each position across the league. There's a first and second team. So the first team is the top players and the second teams are basically the alternatives. And the Dodgers had two representatives. It was Freddie Freeman at first base and Mookie Betts in the outfield, both on the first team. Freeman has been named to that every single year since it started in 2019. So that's 5 straight for him. And Mookie Betts has won it 3 times now, I believe, in the last 4 years.
Yeah.
So great for both of them. It's voted on by fans and other things are taken into account as well. And then Ohtani also was named to the team representing the Angels as both the designated hitter and the starting pitcher for the first team. So I guess you can say the Dodgers had 4 players on there now since the Angels don't have Ohtani anymore, as we all know. But yeah, they had a few other players who were nominated but didn't get selected. Will Smith, JD Martinez, and Evan Phillips, and Clayton Kershaw as well were their other nominees, but they all lost out. They have 5 starting pitchers selected for both first and second team. So Kershaw was not, unfortunately, one of the top 10 pitchers named to that team, but the Dodgers did pretty well still.
Yeah. So that, if you want to read more, you could go to DodgerBlue.com. We have a full article with all the players listed that were selected to the all MLB team. So we do have some great questions in here. Let's start with this. I know we usually say food for the end, but I want to make sure we get to our buddy Bob. He wants to know, what food do you wish Dodger Stadium would add? He wants crab boils.
For me, they just need to bring back that chicken sandwich they had last year. They had it, and I got it a few times, and then they got rid of it, I'm pretty sure, and I just want that back. So, Dodgers, if you're listening, bring it back.
Yeah, Blake's a simple guy. He just wants his chicken sandwich back. For me, this is a good question. I don't know. I don't know if I would pick like one specific thing that I wish they had. I think just in general, if they elevated the food options across the board, it would kind of help. They've certainly done some of it. Shake Shack, I think, is a nice addition. Some of the tacos they do and rotate throughout the season are good. But just in general, across the board, if we could get something maybe a little bit closer to Petco Park food, that would be nice.
In-N-Out's a good choice. More threw that one in the chat.
So this question's from Cassie. Honest opinion about Belly in free agency. Does he deserve to be paid over $200 million?
Simply put, no. And if you want me to go into more detail, his batted ball profile was not good last year, even though he had solid results. I don't think that's going to age necessarily well with him. And I don't think teams are going to be willing to go that far with him.
Yeah, that surprised me a little bit, even though as much as like contracts and money is getting spent just in general in baseball pretty lavishly over the past few years, I don't necessarily see Bellinger getting that much. I think he was NL comeback player of the year. That was a nice season for him with the Cubs, but I don't know if he'll end up getting a contract around that value. Mike M wants to know, how high would the Dodgers go for Yamamoto?
Hand him the blank check and get him to LA. But if you want a specific answer, I would say maybe $350 million, and that's with the posting fee considered into that.
Okay. So related to that, Mad Lad is asking, how much is too much for a Yamamoto contract? So where would you draw the line, factoring in posting fee and all that, like just one total?
I would say 375. I really would not hate giving him like a 35 million AAV. I think in a few years from now, when he's still likely going to be an ace, that contract isn't going to look bad at all. I mean, we saw Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander getting over 40 million a year. So, I mean, I really don't think there's a number I would personally be that scared of to go with him. But I think for the Dodgers standpoint, it's probably going to be around like 375 with the posting fee considered in.
Yeah. For me, I would probably do 350, but also if you got to that point and it came down to it needing to be another 25 million, like, fine, just do it.
That's what I said basically with the Ohtani contract, and you were like laughing at me.
No,
I was like, if it takes 700 million instead of 650 million, then like, what's the difference there?
No, I think you said if it takes 700 million instead of 600, like, because it was $100 million difference, is what Jeff and I both were like, well, wait a minute, that's $100 million.
And it was right.
Well, yes, you were right about that. I didn't see him getting up to 700 million. So credit to Blake and his inside sources on that one. James wants to know, even at 26, is Michael Busch still an attractive piece in a high-end trade package? Maybe for a Rosarena, they can still revisit talks with Tampa Bay. Busch obviously is not in the plans.
I think Busch is still intriguing to some teams. It depends how teams view him. I think a lot of teams might view him as like a first base and designated hitter only, which might limit some of his value. But if a team feels confident he can play second base or even left field or just something other than first base or DH, I think they'd have more interest in him. Maybe the Marlins kind of make sense as a team that needs hitting and has a lot of excess pitching. Jesus Luzardo has been probably the most talked about name recently. He's going to cost a lot more than Michael Busch, but I think that's something where both teams could line up fairly well. Regarding Tampa Bay, I don't necessarily see that as a fit. I think they probably would have tried to get that all done in one deal, or we would have already heard about Arozarena's names coming up in those discussions already, and we didn't. That specifically said they weren't discussing him at all, so I just don't really see that happening. And like I've said on the show before, I think Arozarena has a lot more name value than actual trade value at this point.
Yeah, that's a comment that has Scott wanting to fight you, because I know Arozarena is his guy.
Well, Scott's sick, so if he wants to come fight me, like, I'm okay.
This question's from AC8. Did anything develop with Roki Sasaki requesting to be posted? I guess it's not happening since we're past December 15th. So yeah, basically, Sasaki, I think, asked. Did he? Was it a request that he wanted to be, or he asked them if they would consider it? Like the reporting, I thought was a little complicated.
I think U.S. media reported it as he wanted to be posted now, but I think like Japanese media was clarifying that he basically said, "I want to be posted soon," which could mean like within the next year or so as well. And I think it kind of just blew up a little bit just because of the profile of who he is. So it was never going to happen within the 5 days that it was requested for per the report. So I think if he does have the clause that Otani had and it will allow him to pick whenever he wants to come, it could happen next year, but it's probably more so going to be 2027 when we see him, unless he has that clause.
Yeah. So real quick, before I get to this next question, I do see comments, people talking about Dodger Dogs and Farmer John needing to be back because they're better. At the risk of lighting the chat on fire, I will say that the Dodger Dog, old and new, are both relatively the same and extremely overrated. Neither one of them is good. Let's move on. Aaron, I just want to throw this up because you said y'all are wild for trying to get Yamamoto for over 200. I mean, if you try offering him a $200 contract, you're not even in the discussion at this point. So it kind of needs to be over 200 million. Let's see here. This one's from Sermon King question. Who else do you think the Dodgers should sign? Is Ryan Brazier returning on the table? What were your thoughts on Brazier potentially being back?
So they are keeping tabs on Ryan Brazier per one of the latest reports on him. I don't think there's been much to his market other than that, at least that we've heard reported. I think teams are still targeting their top guys like Josh Hader's out there and Yamamoto, of course, and Snell and Montgomery. Like, there's a lot of options that still need to come off the board before you start seeing some of those lesser names really start to move and pick up. So it's possible. I'm not sure I necessarily see it happening, but you can't count it out. For who else should the Dodgers sign? It's tough to say. I mean, it depends what happens with Yamamoto. He's obviously the top choice there. If they miss out on him, we talked about maybe Imanaga or Jordan Montgomery. They still need an outfielder, whether that's via the trade route or signing someone. So they have work to do. I know a lot of people want Kike back, but we'll see what they end up doing.
Yeah. So this question's from Caleb. What's the chances of seeing Dustin May pitch? Do you think we'll see him by at least the middle of the season? Do you want me to take it?
If you have an answer, I'm kind of thinking it through.
So I know Brandon Gomes at the GM meetings last month basically said Dustin May had not started throwing yet, and the Dodgers weren't going to rush that process by any means. And so because of that, as much as they hope that May is potentially back for the second half of the 2024 season, it's really not necessarily a guarantee. So you might not see Dustin May until 2025, unfortunately. Let's see what else we have here. Alleluia One wants to know over or under Yamamoto against Cole's contract.
I could see that going both ways because Garrett Cole's probably the best free agent pitcher we've seen, at least in quite some time. So teams are going to pay him pretty well no matter what. Yamamoto is, of course, an unknown, but he has the projections working for him, and his age is very intriguing to teams. So just with how aggressive all the teams are bidding, I'm going to say over, but I'm not confident in that.
Yeah, so real quick, going back to the hot dog conversation, EB says the best hot dogs in LA are the street dogs, the ones you see outside of the clubs or big sporting events. I do agree with this. They make them on their grills right there outside. They're bacon wrapped, put some ketchup on it. Not healthy for you, but very good. Ice Cream 7 wants to know, would the Dodgers be interested in a reclamation project with Madison Bumgarner? Blake, you big Bumgarner guy?
No, but they paid Cole Hamels $1 million before to try and see what he can do. So, maybe. I just saw a question related to the hot dogs, though. Cupid Hot Dogs next to CSUN is okay. Unfortunately, that place is closing down soon. I think there's still some other ones around, but that specific one will not be around anymore, and I'm kind of disappointed about that.
Yeah, that's very CSUN specific crowd there. The Bumgarner thing, I forgot if it was before he signed with the Diamondbacks, like it came out that the Dodgers had some interest in him or something, and I
think it was from Ken Rosenthal saying like aggressive interest or something like that, and it surprised me at the time. And
yeah, that just didn't make sense then. Bumgarner's only older now, so no, I don't see that happening.
What if Kershaw went to the Giants and Bumgarner went to the Dodgers?
That would be awkward, and then they started in a game against each other.
Yeah.
Rianu Keeves, I like the name, wants to know, will it hurt more to lose Kershaw to the Rangers than the sheer amount of happiness of getting Ohtani?
Depends what your feelings are on Kershaw. Like, as a player, I think they should move on from Kershaw. As the franchise icon and legend he is, I think they should keep Kershaw. So I would say for me personally, the joy of getting Ohtani is more just because it's exciting for both ends, is the acquisition of the person and the player. And with Kershaw, like, it's more just about who he is as the person rather than who he is as a player.
Yeah, so really quick to continue kind of the food talk, which Blake and I enjoy. Obi-Wan wants King Taco back at the Ravine. I agree with that. King Taco at Dodger Stadium would be excellent. That's a good call. Let's see here. We have a super chat, another one from John Bleeding Blue. Bring back the Kulaku, reminds me of my youth.
Those things were fantastic, and I'm so sad they got rid of those because they were fantastic.
Okay, I'm indifferent to it, but so I'd be fine. Anything new, I'll get behind
them. But okay. I haven't gone to check.
So we're seeing some King Taco overrated. I mean, it's good. I don't know. I will say though, Quisados down the hill from Dodger Stadium is excellent. If you haven't tried it, I recommend that you do. Scott Johnson, he's asking about Brazier. Throughout Brazier's stats, very interested in his performance. Good performance, making his cost too high. Scott, as Blake just kind of alluded to, there really honestly hasn't been a ton of reported interest, or at least the market of teams that might look to sign Brazier. Some of that might come as definitely, maybe the starters come off the board and then some of the relievers start signing. Maybe we'll see things pick up there, but I don't think there's really, at least for now, kind of a true indication of Brazier's market maybe being too high for the Dodgers in terms of what they're looking to spend. Let's see.
Here's the left field question. Who do we see getting the bulk of innings?
Yeah, here we go. From Random Hero. He wants to know who do you see getting the bulk of innings out in left field next year? Someone on the 40-man or someone not on the roster?
I'm going to go with someone not on the roster just because I think it's going to be a platoon and Chris Taylor, and Chris Taylor is on the wrong side of that platoon in terms of playing time. He'll see the time versus lefties, and there's far more righties in the league. So I'm going to say someone not on the 40-man.
Okay. I think... Oh, man, this is tough. Yeah, I agree with you. No, yeah, I agree with you. I think they will make a trade or a signing, and that's who ends up becoming the primary left fielder.
I think David Peralta is still out there.
Yeah, there you go. Paul Gutierrez, I heard Ohtani is open to playing left field if he's able to. Yeah, Paul, we discussed that earlier in the show. If you missed it, Dave Roberts was on, I think, Dan Patrick, right?
Yeah.
And he basically said that there's a potential scenario where towards the end of next season, that Ohtani would be recovered enough to play some left field. I'm skeptical. I would be shocked if I'll set the over-under on Ohtani's games played in left field at 1.5.
I'll take the over on that because that means like 2 games there, and he could appear there like in an emergency situation in the 12th inning of a game or something. So okay, I'll take the over confidently.
All right, there you go. Steve A., you guys willing to make your Yamamoto prediction? Blake is still sticking with the Dodgers, and so once we're done with this live show, if you want to rewind it, it will stay up, or if you want to listen to it via podcast, you can hear Blake discussing his outlook for Yamamoto. So he's still sticking with the Dodgers, and I will too. I think Ohtani makes a significant difference.
Pick someone else. You said Toronto is getting
Oh,
Ohtani.
that's right.
And then you said the Dodgers were 100% beating the Diamondbacks. Your track record isn't great right now, so let's mix it up a bit.
See, I just strive to bring balance to the show. That's why I pick other teams other than the Dodgers. That's the only reason why I do it, for sheer balance. Taking one for the team. Hawaiian Kira wants to know, when will we know who gets invited to spring training? That stuff is usually like, I think, late January, maybe early February, when they announce some of the non-roster invites. But yeah, kind of not any sooner than that. If you see prominent who did they just sign to a minor league deal recently?
Austin Beck.
Austin
And
Beck. There you
Daniel
go.
Hudson.
Yeah, so like Hudson and Beck will certainly be non-roster invites to spring training, but other than that, some of that stuff will kind of trickle out later. Let's see. Obi-Wan wants to know, question, is Walker Buehler scheduled to be back in spring training? Yeah, so I think Buehler should certainly be throwing by the time spring training starts. I don't know how much he might start. I would expect him to make at least one or two cactus. Oh, well, actually, spring training shortened this year because they're opening in South Korea, so maybe not. But he should at least be pitching in, some B games or bullpen sessions, stuff like that. And also, we have a reminder from Lieutenant Beach's Neil Crispat is also another signing. He's a kind of a little bit of a veteran, so he probably has a non-roster invite as well. Trace Thompson reunion, hepatitis C. Trace just signed, was it the
Mets?
The Mets, that's right. Yeah, so no reunion with the Dodgers, at least not yet.
Bob Nightingale reminding us of that one.
Yeah, here we go. Thanks, Bob. Let's see. Rihanna Keys wants to know if the Blue Jays ever signed Robert. I don't want to butcher his last name, so I'll just call him Robert from Shark Tank. No reports yet. I think he's driving a hard bargain. He did say he was going to start teaching his son also how to pitch and hit so that he would get a lucrative contract, but nothing yet. Random Hero wants to know, think the Randy deal is dead. One, I don't think
alive.
Right. I don't think it was ever really started. And so two, it's not necessarily dead per se, but it doesn't appear that the Rays are interested in trading Arozarena at this time. Here's a good one for you, Blake. James wants to know, did the Dodgers maybe think Pepio was a Ross Stripling, Mitch White type and thus need to cash him out now for a higher end starter?
I do think that was the case. I think maybe he has a little more upside than them. I mean, Ross Stripling was an all-star that one year, but mostly he's been a back of the rotation swingman type. So I do think that's kind of how they viewed Pepio. When I was looking at their Stuff Plus earlier today, when I was talking about Glasnow on my Twitter, Ryan Pepio was below league average for his stuff ranking. So I just think the Dodgers saw regression was going to hit and decided we can get a top end starter for him. So why not make this deal? It's easier to replace a Ryan Pepio than it is to add a Tyler Glasnow. So I think that's just really what went all into it.
This question's from Noah, who has been with us in other episodes. He says, I know you guys like Del Taco. What's your typical order? I'll go first, Blake, if you want to gather your thoughts. I'll switch things up a little bit, so I'll just tell you the items that I like from Del Taco. Their Double Del burger is really good. I think it's kind of an underrated burger for drive-through. Their quesadilla isn't bad. Their nachos, I forget what they call them, but they put like the green chili and white like nacho cheese sauce on them are really good. And surprisingly, their chili cheese fries, if you do, I think the deluxe one, it comes with sour cream on it, which I wouldn't have guessed like chili cheese and sour cream with fries is a good mix, but it is pretty, I like it.
For me, I'll go with the burger, and their epic queso burritos are good. I mean, I don't go to Del Taco a ton, so I think Matt definitely likes it the most here. He's the high man on this topic.
Yeah, me and actually Daniel also seemed like he was pretty high on it too, since he has one right across the street from him. But yeah, I agree with you. If it's not Daniel, it's definitely me.
I did see a comment about the Wingster, though, and that place is amazing. I love going there. It's like 5 to 10 minutes away from Dodger Stadium, so highly recommend going there.
I haven't had it, so I'll take your word for that.
Go there.
Let's see. A lot of food questions now. Here's a good one. GI wants to know, are Bush and or Vargas on the 40-man come spring training?
I'll say Vargas is and Bush is traded. And I say that because Vargas is younger and they can just option him and keep him in AAA for the year and kind of have some depth there. For Bush, they haven't really shown they're willing to give him a chance, so I still think he gets traded.
Yeah, I agree with you. Okay, so let's see. Let's keep scrolling. So we are probably going to be winding down here shortly. So get your final questions in. Again, just start it with question in all caps so we could see it. Dave Luna wants to know, between Sheehan and Stone, who are you higher on? In his Dodger Talk interview, Kershaw picked Sheehan.
Yeah, for me, it's Sheehan, and I don't think it's necessarily close. His stuff was elite. And I think when Kershaw was having that interview, he said possibly better stuff than Bobby Miller, which came as a shock to me because, I mean, Bobby Miller's been the guy he's a top prospect just because of his stuff. He throws hard. He's got the elite slider and he's got the curveball. So, I mean, if Kershaw probably knows a little more about pitching than I do, I think that's fair to say. So, if Kershaw's taking Sheehan, I'm sticking with Sheehan too.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I do see some comments, people saying in and out would be great. Here, I'll put it. There's an article as to why in and out basically wouldn't go into Dodger Stadium. I saw somebody saying they won't. Yeah, here, Hawaiian Kira, good point. Unless in and out had control of the product, there will not be one at Dodger Stadium. That is basically the obstacle to in and out potentially going to Dodger Stadium. LC FanFest 2024, will Ohtani be there? My guess is yes, but that stuff is subject to change and not really set. I mean, sometimes they announce players are going to be there and then their last minute changes, so we can't guarantee it by any means. Don Kim wants to know, where did it go? Here we go. Which rookie pitcher will have the best sophomore season, Miller or Sheehan?
I'm going to say Miller because he's locked in the rotation at this point. Sheehan might be a guy who starts in AAA and kind of comes up later in the season when there's an injury. So I'm going with Miller.
Okay. Jason's asking, do you see Margot going in another deal before the season starts? I would be a little surprised by that just because I think the Dodgers acquired him as part of that trade kind of for the specific reason of being a platoon. So I don't know if like another signing and trade would net them. I mean, they already still need one more outfielder, even with adding Margot. So I'm not sure if they would flip him. Blake, do you agree, disagree?
I think it depends on what they do with Kike Hernandez. If Kike's back, I could see Margot getting traded. If Kike signs somewhere else as like a starting center fielder or something, which is kind of in the reports that might happen, I think they'll keep Margot.
Okay, yeah, I agree. Let's see. Here, Mr. John Rod wants to know, when Ohtani is ready to pitch, where does he rehab since he is hard DH? So Ohtani won't be pitching during the 2024 season, so he won't be kind of ramping up from a pitching standpoint until maybe that offseason, a year from now, more or less, and or January 2025 and kind of into spring training. So that's when we would see him pitch. So you don't have to worry about Ohtani potentially leaving the Dodgers at some point this upcoming season for a rehab assignment because he can't pitch yet. I think that might be it. Blake, did you happen to see any other?
There's the one, would you trade Michael Bush for Alek Manoah? For me, I'd say yes, which you're probably losing some of the upside potentially. But I don't even know if that's accurate because Alek Manoah was a very good pitcher before he kind of just fell off. So I think it would depend on the Dodgers if they think they can fix something with him and figure out what's wrong. But I think it's an interesting trade to say the least.
Okay. Thank you for catching that one. This one, Paul Charles, not a question, but more of a comment. I would put Kershaw in the bullpen to finish his career and win his second World Series ring to go out a winner. I think, excuse me, in theory, that might sound okay. So you're not using Kershaw, you're not using a rotation spot on Kershaw, who I think could still be effective, but Kershaw's velocity kind of dropping off to the levels that it's at these days wouldn't play well coming out of the bullpen.
Wasn't his last bullpen appearance giving up the home run in 2019?
I mean, Blake, like, is that something you really needed to bring up? Like, now, look, give it a second, and the comments now are going to get very upset with you because that was just so unnecessary.
Then we can answer the timeline for
Yes.
Yamamoto or the
Yes.
Chris Taylor salary relief one.
Yes, the Chris Taylor is where I'm going to, so hopefully people won't start yelling at you. TQT wants to know any chance Chris Taylor is dealt for some salary relief if Yamamoto is signed. Rojas is the backup infielder, and I'd rather let Vargas and Bush play left.
I'd say there's a chance in that scenario, but I wouldn't really expect it because, like we said, they do need another outfielder. And I don't think the team is really confident letting Vargas or Bush play left field. And I'm not sure they'd value either of them more than the salary relief saved if they were to trade Chris Taylor. So I think Chris Taylor is going to be on the roster. That's just my perspective on it. But if they did match up with someone on a trade, I guess it wouldn't totally shock me. I guess it's the fair thing to say about that.
So here's another question from Caleb. What do you think Jonathan India would be a good addition to the Dodgers?
No, because the Dodgers already have their second baseman and Mookie Betts.
That's right. Another super chat from John Bleed and Blue. So thank you for this. Michael Bush, the oldest rookie of the year.
I have no idea. I'm checking that real quick to see if that's a thing. No, because someone won it at age 32. Sam Jethro.
Oh, wow.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Adam818 wants to know, will Cartaya ever get called up?
Not this year. He struggled a lot in AA last year, and the only reason he was on the 40-man was to protect him from the Rule 5 draft. So I don't think he's a possibility this year. It wouldn't shock me if he's traded, and it wouldn't shock me if they just give him another chance to try and figure out what went wrong. Brandon Gomes still seemed to be high on him when he talked about him, but of course there's also GM speak, and he's not going to come out and trash a player totally. So it depends what the Dodgers really think of him, but I don't think it's going to happen this year.
Yeah. What about 2025?
I think that's better for his timeline, and it would require him to make a jump this year. Catcher development is one of the more harder ones to project. A lot of times catchers debut older than most other prospects do, so it really just depends on how he starts to adjust to AA pitching and then AAA pitching.
So this question's from Obi-Wan. If Yamamoto deal fails, is Blake Snell even an option? So the most recent report from John Heyman is that the Dodgers aren't interested in Blake Snell anymore, like Blake and I sort of have referenced in past videos and earlier tonight. You know, their interest in Snell didn't necessarily make a whole ton of sense to begin with, even though they do face a need for starting pitching. I know Blake and I also are in the camp of, you know, how much value is there really with Snell, given some of his struggle with walks and stuff like that. So doesn't really, I don't see him, honestly, as an option. But Blake, do you feel differently?
No, I don't think they're going to go anywhere near Snell with the contract he wants, and just doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, so I know I said we're winding down, but you guys are coming up with good questions. So we'll keep this going for now. Javier wants to know, do you know if Yamamoto and the Dodgers are scheduled to meet for a second time prior to his decision?
There's been nothing reported on that, but it really wouldn't shock me if he does. I was also kind of thinking he may have went to New York because he originally met with all the teams in LA, so maybe he also went to check out their stadiums and kind of get an idea there. The Dodgers were the only team he went to the stadium of. So it could happen. Wouldn't shock me if it does happen. I think maybe it would surprise me because the reports are he could decide sometime this week or certainly before Christmas. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that ties into this question I was about to throw up. Sam Vasquez wanted to know, what is the timeline on Yamamoto's decision? So far, it seems like Yamamoto will be making his decision, like Blake said, before Christmas. Here, Blake, we have a question about your decor and the hockey stick on your wall.
So it's a Jonathan Quick autographed hockey stick, and I had it in my room before, and then I moved it out to my office, and I haven't hung it up yet, so it's just kind of sitting there leaning against the wall for now. But I do have a Corey Seager picture that's going to get hung up there pretty soon. Just getting framed right now. So we'll have some changes here in the coming week or so.
Yep. Blake is saving the Seager picture for when Jeff is back to host, and then they'll be on the video, and Jeff will be greeted with Seager over his shoulder.
I'll move here so you can always just see it right up in the corner, like right here.
This question is from Nomo, aka Derek. Should Ohtani bat second or third in the lineup? This is actually an interesting question. I know we've kicked it around a little bit a few different times. Dave Roberts said at Ohtani's press conference when he was speaking with media that he was in the weight room with some of the players last week, and Freddie Freeman actually brought it up. I think a little bit tongue in cheek and just asking like if Dave had decided yet on the lineup order. And basically Dave's answer is that not yet, but also the Dodgers don't necessarily seem too concerned just because of the different options and kind of trusting that wherever they put the players, everybody will be fine. But to Nomo Splitter's question, do you think Ohtani should bat second or third?
I would put him second just because I want to see him get more at bats, and he has more speed than Freddie Freeman, so you get more stolen base potential. I know if Freeman was here, he'd call out that he stole 20 bases and had a great season running the bases there, his best one. But Ohtani just has elite speed that Freeman doesn't, and getting more at bats is always good for Ohtani.
There's been a lot of, I've seen a lot on Twitter and even some references in the comments here right now that Ohtani bats better when he's hitting second in the lineup. How much stock might you put into something like that?
I don't think it's a huge deal because, I mean, you really only hit second once in a game, maybe twice. And then after that, the lineup gets changed between innings and everything constantly. Like he might lead off the fourth inning or he might be hitting fifth in the third inning. You just never really know what happens there. So I don't put too much stock into it. I think it's more just kind of the randomness of how it all plays out. And yeah, just my take on it.
Okay, here's a good one that maybe we'll end on unless something else comes in. CJ wants to know, will the Seager picture be hung before Yamamoto signs?
I'll say no because I might be lazy and just don't hang it up for a little bit. And I'm hoping Yamamoto signs soon.
All right, there we go. I think that's going to do it for tonight. Let's see, do a final check. Here, Jaime Gonzalez wants to know, is Austin Barnes returning?
Yes, and we're just going to leave it at that because Jeff isn't here.
There we go. Yeah, all right. I think that's going to do it. Thank you again to everybody for joining us. We appreciate all the interaction. We hope we try to answer as many of your questions as possible. And just a quick, not a reminder, but a heads up that, as you know, we typically do these Sunday night shows weekly. But considering that the next 2 weeks are Christmas Eve and then New Year's Eve, we're probably going to be shifting things around a little bit, maybe mix in one show, a live show on a Friday or Saturday, just kind of before the new year. And then we'll see you guys after that. So make sure you're following us, probably on Twitter. It might be the best way, at DodgerBlue1958. Sam, hopefully this is kind of answering your question. We're not 100% sure when we're going to be doing a live show next. We're going to try to see when schedules sort of line up. We don't necessarily want to do it on Christmas Eve because we want you guys to, be able to spend time with your friends and family. Same thing for New Year's Eve. We anticipate people might be out of town and stuff like that. So we're trying to see. We're going to shift things around. Like I said, we'll definitely have at least one live show before the new year. Also, we are putting up videos throughout the week, kind of either clip segments from this show if you missed a specific topic that we covered, and or we from different events that are happening, maybe the Dodgers Foundation. Blake recently was at the stadium for a holiday event that the Dodgers hosted with Baby to Baby. Joe Kelly was there. Blake probably didn't know it, but John Legend and his wife Chrissy Teigen also were there. I don't know if Blake knows who those people are. He can tweet us to tell us after the fact if he does or not. But yeah, that's where things stand. So once again, thank you for joining us. My name's Matthew. That's Blake, and we'll see you next time.